All right, folks, get to your seats. All right, let's quiet down. Come on, let's get in your seats. An important thing that I forgot to mention in my introductory remarks that I want to remind you about in the back of your folders is an evaluation form. We covet those forms. I will personally read every word in those forms. And so please start thinking about things you want to say. Try to be constructive. And please don't tell me the food is bad. I already know that. And no, we can't improve this selection. And, that's beyond our control. That is Milligan. We would like to make the food better, but we can't do that. It's helping you prepare you for college, though, because trust me, at college, it'll be worse. But please be thoughtful about this. Make suggestions. One of the things we ask for is speakers you would like to hear in the future. Tell us things that we can change. And again, probably no sense telling me to cut the number of lectures down, because that's not happening, okay? That is the basis of this conference, is that we will feed you with the word until you overflow. So we're not going to change that. But tell us the things you liked. Tell us the things you didn't like. Tell us the things you want to hear. And I promise you I will read every word. And we do make adjustments and changes in the conference year to year. And we do covet your opinion. So I just wanted to remind you now while you had time to think about it. And I'll look forward to reading them.
Okay, let me introduce our next speaker. For those of you who are visiting, our next speaker is Marcus Pittman. He's married to Laura, who is here. In 2015, he helped create and build Apologia Studios to over 250,000 YouTube subscribers. He's a producer and director for Babies Are Murdered Here and Babies Are Still Murdered Here, which was proudly banned from Amazon. Currently, he's Chief Content Officer and founder of Lure.tv, a new streaming service dedicated to cancel-proof, crowd-funded films and TV shows. Mr. Pittman.
How's it going? Y'all ready to talk about video games? So today, is my screen up? There it is. So our theme is kill the dragon, get the girl, the gospel in Super Mario Brothers. So today we're going to talk about the importance of video games as a worldview mechanism for proclaiming the gospel and also for furthering the arts and advancing the kingdom of God. This is not something you typically hear at a Christian conference, this sort of view of technology in a positive way. A lot of times in churches, you hear a very negative view of video games, especially from an independent fundamentalist sort of mindset. You get really crazy stuff like this. Oh, do we have audio? Well,
You say, Brother Sean, why are you preaching about video games? Because this is an epidemic in the new IFB. Young men playing video games all day long for hours. I see it every single week, and it sickens me. The average age of video game players in the United States this year was 36 years old. We should never play these things, and I'm going to show you why God hates them. First thing, it profits nothing. It is vain. It doesn't mean anything. You are playing Thumb Wars with a piece of plastic looking at a bunch of lights on a blinking screen. It means nothing. You understand? This is what you should be doing. Titus chapter 2, verse 6. Look down at it. Young men, likewise, exhort to be sober-minded in all things, showing thyself a pattern of good works. When you're playing video games, is that a pattern of good works? Is you getting a high score on Mario a pattern of good works? Really? No, it's not. Why don't you delete all those video games off your phone and take your Xbox and toss it out the window? It's vain, it's stupid. Get rid of it.
So, so that's the sort of stuff that you typically hear when it comes to video games. Some of the points are true. You have grown men who abandon their families and they become obsessed with video games, and that's all they care about, and then they end up getting divorced, or worse, they never get married at all because they're just playing video games all day. But there are pretty valuable uses of video games, and we're going to get into those. But the idea that you're just playing with plastic with a blinking screen and there's nothing valuable that can come from that, just be clear, he recorded that sermon and put it on YouTube where you watch it on a blinking screen. So, so when we talk about these things, we need to be sort of realistic with what video games are. There are dangers for sure, and we're going to go through the dangers first so we can talk about what I think we've all heard the dangers before, but I think what we really haven't really heard is the real valuable uses of this multi-billion-dollar industry that Christians seem to have just completely abandoned and given over to the world. So the first thing, of course, is idolatry. The Bible says, formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. Galatians 4:8. So being enslaved to false gods, we know that video games can become an obsession. It can become an idol. It can be something that you become addicted to, and that is dangerous. But the same is true for alcohol. You can become addicted and obsessed with alcohol, and the Bible condemns drunkenness, but it does not condemn the wine itself. So there's many things in the world where we don't become Gnostics, where we don't say that the material is bad inherently in and of itself. The other thing, of course, is laziness. The Bible says in Proverbs 19:15, slothfulness casts into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. So, you know, there's people who don't have jobs. They live off the government welfare system, and they stream on Twitch to an audience of nobody, and they think that they're going to make a career out of that when really they're not. They don't have the talent or the skill to be able to do so, and they're just abandoning actual responsibility, like getting married, having a wife, and having kids. That is a real problem when it comes to video games. The other problem, of course, is not honoring your parents. Now, I don't want any of you guys to go home and say, Marcus was talking about how video games are godly, so you have to buy me a PlayStation 5. That is not the case I'm making. Your parents have set rules for you based on their requirements for you and your screen time. You're to honor your parents. You're to respect their rules for you. And like, of course, the Bible says, honor your father and your mother, that your days will be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You are to honor your parents. So I don't want to get any emails from parents saying, my son or daughter is demanding I get them a PlayStation 5 because of your talk. That is not the point of this at all. So, again, so there are real dangers to video games. There's real dangers to any material possession or even films. You can be obsessed with film. You can be obsessed with television. You can be obsessed with a whole host of digital technology. It's really easy to do, but that doesn't neglect the benefits of it. So let's go through a brief history of video games. The first video game was a simple Pong game and was played on an oscilloscope in 1958 called Tennis for Two. It was invented by William Higginbotham, who was the son of a Presbyterian preacher. Now, I don't know if William himself was a Christian at all, but I always find it interesting when you see these advancements in technology, science and technology. It seems that a Christian worldview is not that far away. And so here you have an example of that. This is actually the first video game It was made on an oscilloscope in the 1950s. And I don't know if you could tell, but it's essentially tennis. So there's the line in the middle, and then there's just the curving ball that would just bounce back and forth, and people lined up to play this thing. They haven't seen anything like it before. I can imagine like this, that's like state-of-the-art graphics right there. Before that, but think about it, before this, they never thought that you could actually control and manipulate things on screens before. They just got TV, but the idea that you can actually use the TV to actually control what you see on there was sort of revolutionary. So along comes two companies really. Pong was the one that really stormed the gates. Pong was invented in 1972. It was originally released as a series of arcade cabinets and then brought into homes. So have any of you guys actually played like old school Pong before? Yeah, so you guys played it. It's just a ball bouncing in between two paddles on the left and the right. And this was a massive success. They had over 8,000 cabinets throughout the country. You could go somewhere. At this time, you actually had to go somewhere and play. It wasn't in your home. Well, actually it was, but it was very rare that you would go to someone's home to play. It was much easier to go to the mall, and then you could play Pong there. They did introduce the home versions. Both Magnavox and Atari did that. So, but also in this time, in the 1970s, we had something that was Dungeons and Dragons that came out too. This was another sort of way of which gaming was starting to take hold in the 1970s. So Dungeons and Dragons were invented by two people who were heavily influenced by the Christian worldview. Gary Gygax was briefly a Jehovah's Witness, and David Arneson was a born-again believer and an elder in his local Presbyterian church. So those are the two guys credited with starting Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to get into Gary. Gary's a pretty interesting character because he was briefly a Jehovah's Witness. Some of his family was Jehovah's Witness. It was said that he was, from people that knew him, said he was a Jehovah's Witness for about 30 seconds, and he never returned. But throughout his life, he struggled with Arianism versus Trinitarianism, and he never landed on either side. So we're not too sure when he died, if he went to heaven or not. We can say that salvation is not based on proper theology. It's based on faith, and so the hope is that he went to heaven anyway. But he did show up, and he went to some evangelical Christian gaming conventions, and he talked about his faith, and he talked about some of these things. So this is a guy right here. He's head of the Christian Gamers Guild, and I can't think of his name. I have it pulled up on the notes, but the notes are not coming up. But anyway, if you go to christian-gaming-guild.org, you can visit his website. He has lots of blogs and articles, and then they used to do conventions. But this is my friend Ethan Soders, by the way. He does Twitch streaming. His YouTube channel is called Non-Sovereign, and he talks about the Christian worldview of video games and stuff. So he's a good guy to subscribe to. But this is someone who knew Gary Gygax and the founders of Dungeons and Dragons, and they're talking about sort of how this sort of came to be.
Most people don't know that Gary and Dave were Christians. Now, Gary, back in the early 70s, mid 70s, when he was developing D&D, him and Dave Arneson were the two developers of Dungeons & Dragons. Mm-hmm. Dave is a Christian. Was a Christian. He passed away a few years ago. He was a born-again believer. He was an evangelical Christian. And he was actually an elder in his local church there where he lived.
Yeah, that was so surprising to learn that.
So it's crazy to me because when you think of Dungeons & Dragons, you think of demonic sorcery, and you think of all this stuff that happened in the 1980s, which was the Satanic Panic. And so the Satanic Panic was this big media-driven impulse by the news to sort of try to label as many things as not being Christian or into this demonic realm as possible, and it wasn't logically thought through. So you have these guys, David and Gary, they created this game. Now, I don't know if anybody, has anybody here ever played Dungeons & Dragons? Look at that. So you guys are familiar with how it works. So basically, you sit around a table with friends and you create your own character, and then essentially it's a storytelling mechanism. It's a way to tell fantasy stories in a way where you can fight good and good versus evil, and your decisions that you make are determined by the roll of the dice. That's the easiest way to put it. Somehow they got twisted into doing Ouija board stuff and all this other stuff that didn't really have any truthfulness to Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, the Dungeons and Dragons, the first editions when they were released, they were created with an alignment system. And the alignment system was a way in which you could make your character. And when you made your character, that character had to be either good or bad, essentially. And there was no way you could manipulate your character. There was objective standards. You're either good or you are bad. And then when, as Dungeons and Dragons evolved and it started to hit a more mainstream postmodern society, things started to change. And so here's him talking about that.
There's one area in particular that I've thought of ever since I got into the bigger D&D community, and I see a lot of content creators on YouTube talking about how alignment doesn't matter. It's an outdated sort of way of thinking,
Right.
whatever else. And you were adamant in our earliest discussion that the alignment system was produced from a Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm. It was. And Gary made no bones about that. He said, yes, it's a Christian worldview, where you have good versus evil, and evil's always evil, and good is good. If the terms mean what they mean in this worldview context. And that's why you see millennials, and the vast majority of them come at it from a postmodern perspective, where truth is relative. Truth is relative to the culture or the situation they're in, as opposed to the modernist concept, well, truth is only relative to its objective standard by which it's measured. And so, of course, they're going to be against alignment, because alignment assumes an objective standard.
Yeah, fixed points by which to measure that sort of thing. And that's
there's an objective standard, and they don't want an objective standard.
So here you have two Christians who made a game that was based on fantasy and fiction, and the media, and to some extent the lack of understanding of the church during the time, or the genuine, heartfelt desire of the church to expose true demonic works and New Age cult stuff. They falsely accused the guys who made Dungeons and Dragons as being a part of this satanic panic, the result of which was you had these Christians who actually retreated away from the game in which they made, and they sold it to an organization, Wizards of the Coast, who eventually turned the game into postmodernism. And now in the newer versions of Dungeons and Dragons, you have weird definitions of gender. You can be whatever gender you want in your character. You can be whatever sexuality you want in your character. All this sort of stuff, just completely given over to the original views the creators have. So the reason I bring this up is because there's a value to games, whether you're playing with your family or whether you're playing with your friends. There's a value that these things can be used as a sort of community activity in which for fellowship and fun, and to come together and tell stories of good defeating evil. And so this is sort of the thing I want you guys to remember as we're going through this, that there are valuable, like gaming can be valuable. It can actually advance the kingdom of God, even if it seems like the other people are manipulating and twisting the original intent. So again, with the rise of the satanic panic in the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons was falsely accused to be a demonic activity, and the church rebuked it. They forced the founders to retreat from publicly sharing their faith and defending their work until much later in their life. So there was actually There's actually a video you can watch on YouTube of Gary Gygax before he died, and he's actually at the Christian Gamers Guild, and he's talking about sort of his faith and sort of that whole sort of satanic panic. He talks about how somebody committed suicide, and then 60 Minutes went and reported it as because they were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And he said, I got a letter from the person who committed suicide that said it was not Dungeons and Dragons, from the family of the one who committed suicide. Sorry. Weird. That would be, well, okay. So, so the person, the family of the person who committed suicide wrote a letter to him and said it actually, your game actually encouraged him to keep living as long as he did. And he gave that letter to 60 Minutes, and 60 Minutes never aired it, and they aired the story that they went with, that it was the game Dungeons and Dragons that caused him to commit suicide, and that started the satanic panic. You can see that stuff, but this isn't the first time. This isn't the first time that we've seen this. This whole satanic panic stuff has continued in the church with nonsense like this.
Because it's important for the church to deal with issues as they come to the forefront in society. He said, son, what is that one morning? He said, that's Pokemon. Son, I found out that Pokemon means pocket monster. Pokemon, plural, are incredible creatures that share the world with humans. Each has his own fighting abilities. Some grow and evolve into even more powerful creatures. The children are developing relationships with all these Pokemon creatures, little reclusive, power-filled monsters. But why should they carry these monsters in their pocket? They say the Pokemon whole effort is to train children how to become the #1 Pokemon master in the world. You follow it through the New Age teaching, you find out that masters are those who take control of spirits in the dark realm, and they tell those spirits what to do. The child at some point becomes capable of taking these powers and channeling them through their mind, through their arms, or through their power sources. Power sources, of course, are...
Okay, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a child like blow fire out of his mouth or shoot electricity like Pikachu before. I've never seen that happen. So the reason I show this, we can laugh at it, but this is from a church. And the problem is, I want you guys to think very critical about the worldview stories that video games are telling, because they are telling a worldview. There is no neutrality when a person makes a video game. Every video game has a story to be told. Every video game is trying to teach something. And just like we look at a movie and we can break down and we can critique a movie and we can say, this is the worldview that director was trying to portray, the same could be true with video games, but not like that. That does not make the church look good. It is not academic. It is not thoughtful. And it makes us look foolish, and we become mocked by the world. So I talked to, does anybody out there, y'all know who Colin Gunn is? So he did a movie called Indoctrination and Wait Till It's Free, and the other one he did about youth ministry. I forget the name of that one, but he did those movies. But before he started making those movies, he was a video game designer for a major studio. And I actually called him up and I said, what is it you would tell kids about video games that they should know? And the first thing he told me right off the bat is that video games were originally and always intended to be family activities. So, unlike today where video games are marketed towards single grown men who live with their parents, video games are originally marketed as family activities. So this is the first video game console from Magnavox. I want you to see how they advertise and promote this.
What does your family do on those stay indoors rainy afternoons or on those cold, blustery winter days? Families who are content to let television do its thing often find themselves at its mercy for a choice of entertainment, while people who want television to do their thing entertain themselves with Odyssey, the electronic game of the future, and the family's best foul-weather friend. Odyssey can be many things to your family. Fun, excitement, entertainment, challenge, and education. Why not take one home with you today? It's available only from the Magnavox salesman in the store. Odyssey, the electronic game of the future that lets you do your own thing on television.
I want you to see that shot right there with the older. There, you have a grandparent there with her kids, right? So originally, video games were family focused. These were family activities. These were things that were to bring your family together. In fact, and if you notice in the beginning, the comment was essentially it allowed you to take control over what you see on your television. So if there's some sort of TV show or some sort of content you don't want your kids to see, why don't you play a video game with them instead? You can have control over the content. This was before VCRs and DVRs where you could record or go to the movie store and get something that you wanted to watch or video on demand or any of that. You had to watch what was on TV. So this was advertised as a way for the fathers to take control of what is on their television and enjoy some time with their children. And here's some of the original advertising. You can see fathers and sons and family members together playing together. The first arcades were actually called the Family Amusement Center. So these were places you could go with your family and you could have fun and a good time. If you've ever been to an arcade that's not like Chuck E. Cheese's or one of the big ticket sort of coin-op arcades, but like an actual legitimate arcade, you have people standing around. They're watching each other play. This is a community activity. This is not something you do by yourself while abandoning the family. This is something that you do to be a part of the family. Now, Nintendo has remained successful, I would argue, because of a continued marketing campaign that focuses on video games being a family activity. Sony and Xbox, they've all completely just abandoned the family, and they've only marketed after single men. And now, that's a wise business decision in a country where men are not getting married. When a majority of the men are single men, it makes good business sense to market towards that. But Nintendo has not gone that direction. And so in the 80s, this is actually the first Nintendo Entertainment System, is what it was called in America. But in Japan, when it came out, it was actually called the Family Computer, or the Famicom. So here you can see the first one. It's titled Family Computer, which is interesting because Japan is not known for families today. But back then, they thought it would be smart to market their NES, the NES, as a family computer in Japan. This is a commercial that is relatively recent.
Go, 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 go! Dinner's ready.
This is Mike. By day, he's Mike the businessman. By night, he's Mike the family man. But when he picks up the new Wii remote from Nintendo, he's Mike the warrior superstar athlete man. King of the racetrack. Champion of the tennis court. Vanquisher of evil creatures. And master of, well, just about everything. The new Wii from Nintendo. Revolutionize your gaming experience. Before you know it, your whole family will be warrior superstar athletes.
I love that commercial because it's a video game company rebuking a man for abandoning his family. And at the end, you see the family coming together and playing together. And that's always been Nintendo's message. Nintendo's message has always been play together. This is their latest video game, Nintendo Switch. And of course, the advertising, of course, is the family being together. You see a mom and a dad and kids. It's very rare to see that in a video game industry at all nowadays. But Nintendo still, not only they don't just market that way in a way that's just smart to do because they know they can get parents to buy it. They build their consoles around the idea of the family playing together. The Nintendo Switch comes apart. It has 2 controllers, so you can play with your brother or sister at any time. You can buy additional accessories. They incorporate multiplayer, not online multiplayer, although they do have online capabilities. They incorporate local, in-person playing together. And I think that is to be commended. It's not something you see. And when we think about video games, if your video game playing is taking you away from your family, I think that is a concern and something you need to examine yourself about. But if you use video games as a mechanism to bring your family together, to have fun and to occasionally be together and laugh, then I think that is a blessing and a gift from God. Another way video games are important is that video games save lives. Now, that might sound crazy, but I want you to think about military flight simulators. They're nothing but video games, and they save the lives of people by teaching them to fly an airplane without risking their lives or technology. This is teaching people how to fight. There's other ways video games are essentially life-saving mechanisms. This is a commercial that is by Facebook, actually, talking about the Oculus Rift, their new VR headset, and I'll show you this.
Working in partnership with Oculus, BioFlight VR, and AI Solve, we've designed these experiences to simulate training in low-frequency, high-acuity events. These are situations that don't happen often, but when they do, the stakes are high and lives are on the line. As we begin Module 1, the resident is placed at the foot of the bed. Our emergency medicine technician provides a debrief and current patient status. Our user is presented with a lifelike patient in need of immediate medical treatment. Team members include our ER nurse, respiratory therapist, and pharmacist. Interactive elements include the IV cart, airway cart, and selectable medications from the code cart. Navigation and selection protocols allow the user to make real-time decisions for patient treatment. The resident can also interact with the patient through hotspots on the body that allow for haptic.
So that's just a sampling of one of the medical uses in terms of actually saving lives using video games as a means to actually have real-world practical effects. This is a concept for an actual augmented reality medical system that they plan on designing, in which you can the doctor can actually examine the patient's heart before opening up the patient's body, but before cutting them up, they can use technology and they can examine at the heart and look and see exactly what they're going to do. This is a really big deal. When you talk about video games being like that guy in the beginning when he says video games are completely unprofitable. Seriously? People can learn how to fly in airplanes without risking lives to themselves. They can practice war strategy without actually killing people. They can save lives in doctors' offices. And for us to say video games are completely useless and a complete waste of time is just not true. The issue is whether or not Christians are actually involved in the business doing things with video games that are valuable and worthy of advancing God's kingdom. Another reason video games are important is because video games are big business. Video games are not an industry where there is no money involved in it. In fact, global video game revenue is expected to surge 20% to $179.7 billion in 2020, according to IDC data, making the video game industry a bigger moneymaker than the global movie and North American sports industries combined. So video game, and this was, by the way, in 2020. Who knows how much that grew as a result of COVID? It probably far surpassed that for sure. So when you talk about, oh no, Hollywood, Oh no, Hollywood is run by pagans. Oh no, Hollywood is taking over. What are we going to do? How are we ever going to compete against Hollywood? I would say, well, what about the video game industry? You don't see Christians talking about how the video game industry is completely pagan and taken over, but perhaps they should. The other thing, too, is it's a lot more feasible from an economic standpoint as you guys are looking to figure out what you're going to do in your career. It's a lot more feasible to make a video game on your own in your house without knowing anything but coding and the basics that you need to be able to make a video game. You can upload it to the Apple Store, the Android Store, or you can upload it to Steam, and you can make an income. It is possible to do that. It is not as easy to be able to make a movie and then get a giant return based on, if you make a movie in your house, it's very unlikely that you're going to sell a lot of copies of that movie. However, an example of this was, of course, Minecraft. Minecraft was started by one guy, Marcus Persson, in his basement, and it was sold to Microsoft for $2.5 billion. It sold more copies than any video game in history. Now, this was one guy in his basement that made this. So all that to say is the economics of starting a video game industry is a very low capital. It doesn't take millions of dollars to make a video game. It can be done by one person. The indie video game scene is huge, and most of those video games are done by one or two people or a group of friends, and it makes tons of money every year. And that's the independent game. There's this. Tomorrow I'll talk about decentralization, but there's this decentralization to video games that I think is very important. And in a way, I think it's a blessing that God has protected this industry. Sure, there's Nintendo and Xbox and Sony, but there's a massive independent video game market that rivals that of anything film or Hollywood industry can put out. So one of the reasons Microsoft was so successful is because Microsoft allows for free play with very little worldview manipulation from the creators. It allows for creativity, exploration, and more. So if you think about it, Minecraft, there's very little worldview in the creator mode, on the creative mode on Minecraft. You can play for hours and hours, and all you're doing is building and constructing, and it allows for people to be creative. It is essentially our generation's Legos. That's how Minecraft has become. It's become a massive business, a massive industry, and this is one of the key things about video games is that video games are true artistic mediums. People who do video games, there's animation, sound design, coding, graphics, writing. Video games allow for the arts to come together. So I just want you to think about all the different things that are required for making video games. You need music, you need graphic design, you need coding and software engineering, you need server space and technology, you need IT, you need the ability to do 3D modeling and rendering. All these sort of things come together in that of creating video games. So I know there are people, kids, I know there's some of you in the audience today that have talked to me and said, you're seriously looking to go into the video game industry, and I would like to encourage you to do that. I think we need Christians who are some of the top in their game, who are truly and genuinely making some of the best games in the world, and are doing so to the glory of God and advancement of the kingdom. So another value to video games is that video games are competitive and they teach men to fight well with good sportsmanship. When you're playing with your family, when you're playing with your brother, and you act out and you throw the controller and then you get disciplined by your parents, that is teaching you good sportsmanship. That is a practical model of learning how to be able to fight well, to fight in a world while laughing, as we say with Fight, Laugh, Feast Conference. We like to fight and laugh at the same time. Video games are a great way to teach you how to do that. It's a great way to learn how to control your temperature and to love your brother even when he crushes you. So, this is probably one of the most fascinating things about video games. Is video games are immersive storytelling mediums, and I think one of the best things about video games, if you watch a movie, you don't really become part of that movie. But when you think about video games, you can make a bad decision in a video game. You can do something evil in a video game, and there can be consequences for it. So if you think of it in terms of being a Christian, you can have a character do evil things, and there could be serious ramifications and consequences. And it's a great way to teach morality in a way that a movie doesn't. A movie, you don't actually become that character. You don't actually engage in any of the consequences. In video games, you actually get to take part in these things. You actually get to get consequences for your actions if the game is designed well. If the game is designed poorly from a pagan worldview, you get games like Grand Theft Auto, where there are no consequences for immorality, and there is no moral justification for the game to exist at all. And so when you think about designing video games, think about what are the consequences if the character does evil? What are the rewards and blessings if the character does good? These are all things that video games can teach in a way that movies and films and TV shows can't. So let's see. So what are these? These are three games, by the way. We're speaking about worldview. So what do these three games have in common, other than the fact that they're made by Nintendo? Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, and The Legend of Zelda. Yeah, that's right. It's kill the dragon, save the girl. Right? That's the story of Scripture. That's a great summary of Scripture. Jesus comes to kill the dragon and to get his church. And so these messages, even in these simple 8-bit games early on, the message of killing the dragon and getting the girl, the man being the man, and the man rescuing the woman from danger, those sort of themes are still guiding video games today, even in their newest incarnations. There is a value of, there's something about games that allow the people to sort of escape the liberal propaganda that Hollywood is doing right now, especially with their diversity quotas and their diversity agents that come on set and say, you don't have enough black people in this cast, or you can't have a black person as that cast, or you need to get another gay person, or you need a trans person. That's happening in Hollywood today. That is also happening in the video game industry, but it's being refuted. So the video game industry is one of the last industries where consumers have strongly rejected liberal propaganda at the expense of the story. There's something about video games that people care very passionately about the story being told well and not being used to push a liberal agenda. So I don't know if you guys are familiar. There was one of the hottest games of last year was The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 pushed complete and total homosexuality and transgenderism. They destroyed the story to push these sort of LGBT ideals. The secular video game bloggers, the feminist bloggers, loved the game. They gave it a 95. The user score was a miserable 3.4, one of the lowest rated games of all time. And, so and that's great, yeah. And a lot of this is, I think, because God has protected this industry in such a way that there is this independent video game industry where people can make games for little to no money, and all it takes is time, and it's created this sort of world of video gaming that doesn't rely on major corporations like Hollywood does. Hollywood relies on Disney and Netflix, right? So those are the two big behemoths that are pushing agendas to you. But then you have this video game industry where you can download a video game from any website in the world on the computer, and even on Nintendo Switch, they have a game store, and Xbox has a game store, and PlayStation has a game store. They have these game stores where independent games can be put up there, and I think that sort of decentralization of the gaming industry has really done well at protecting this. This was an amazing thing to see, because this was the hottest game of the year. This was the game that everybody was going to rally around. This was the game that was going to make millions of dollars. The game completely crashed, and the founder of the company that made it, I think the game company is called Naughty Dog, that guy has become a laughing stock to the entire video game industry because he did this. And so it's really phenomenal to see, and I think there's a way we should rejoice that God has preserved it. It's not going to stay that way for long, but I think now is a good opportunity to get in there and to create games that offend the liberals, and to create that attention for yourself, and to continue the fight that's happening, because they're not going to put up with that for long. And it wasn't too long until the feminists got a hold of this score and went and just like review bombed this website to bring the score up. with spam reviews and stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can study that aspect of what happened there. But so I want us to continue to think about the importance and value of video games. And here's Polygon. Polygon is a complete liberal, useless video game website, by the way. But this was an article they did several years ago. It's called How a Group of Game Makers Are Attempting the Impossible, Making Christian Games That Aren't Terrible. And so even the secular industry can look and see that there's something about the Christian video game industry that is doing something different with their video games. Has anybody ever played like Bible Adventures on NES? Has anybody heard of that? On the original Nintendo, it was one of the first Christian video games. You could buy it at Lifeway bookstores. My parents bought it for me one time. And it revolves around Noah going around the ark and picking up animals in his head and trying to get them in the ark. It's it's the most amazing thing. It's terrible theology, because there's like an eagle that comes and like will attack you and like make you drop the animal, and then you got to start all over. So I don't know if that eagle made it on the ark or not. But those were the stupid, silly games that Christians have had. There's all these Christian versions of games, and the film industry does it too. We always want to make a cheesy Christian version of some sort of other movie. But there was this guy, Ryan Green, and Ryan Green, son, he has a 4-year-old kid, and his child got diagnosed with brain cancer. He's a video game designer, and he is a Christian. So him and his wife spent some time, and they created a game called That Dragon Cancer. This game they put on Kickstarter. It is a VR simulator, essentially, of how the gospel is affecting their walk as their child dies from cancer. And I want you to watch this trailer. And when you watch this trailer, I want you to think if video games are unprofitable and meaningless.
Farmer Bill plays building blocks with the cows. Farmer Bill races the horse and Farmer Bill wins. My shoes were untied.
What does Joel love? Wawa. In cups, bathtubs, and the warm, wet tongues and the cool fur of Das. And maybe the sweet moors of daily affection.
Do you know how they celebrate off-treatment day, like when kids are done with their treatments? I guess maybe you don't because you're not in the clinic as much as I am, but on someone's last day, they always bring them a cake and they sing Happy Off Therapy Day to you.
I'm sorry, guys. It's not good.
Basically, he thinks we should move forward with the radiation, and it kind of freaks me out, but it could be another miracle.
There's a story in the Bible where Jesus and his disciples are on a boat. And a furious storm hits the sea, and everyone thinks they're gonna die. Where do you think Jesus is? He's asleep in the back of the boat. Bouncing around. Do you like that? Oh, I love your giggle.
Don't tell me that video games are useless. Only a Christian can make a video game about cancer. What other worldview can do that? There's no other worldview. An atheist cannot make a video game that makes cancer, the battle and fighting cancer, a beautiful story of God's hope. But we have the ability to do that as Christians. This blew up. This went viral. It went nuts. There was a whole documentary about it. The name of the documentary is called Thank You for Playing. I think you can get it on streaming services. You can rent it on Amazon, I know. But it talks about their faith, their desire to serve Christ. It is an incredible story of them. And now they are working to create video game hardware for those that are handicapped and don't have function of their arms. So they're looking for ways where physically disabled people can play video games with their brothers and sisters, and they can play the exact same games and control the entire game with just their eyes or one single button. It's incredible what they're doing, and it is only the Christian worldview that provides those sort of things. So there is an opportunity for Christians to get involved in video games. There is an opportunity for Christians to not only make video games, but to make video games the world won't and the world can't. We have an obligation to go forth into all the world and take dominion, as it says in Genesis, as the Great Commission says at the end of Matthew. We have a divine calling to go out into the world and take dominion over every single industry. We are not to sit back and just accept the word of a few crazy pastors who haven't done their homework or know anything critically about what they're talking about. We have this amazing opportunity, and it's still open in the video game industry. So I'd like to encourage you, if you're thinking about doing computer programming, if you're thinking about getting into the video game industry, to go and do so wholeheartedly, knowing that the kingdom of that you can build the kingdom of God, and that the Lord is behind you and has given you permission to do so. So thank you guys for everything, and I hope you take that call seriously.
Okay, so we're going to take a 3-minute break. And the reason I say that is because we've got quite a few questions, and it wouldn't be the worst thing if we finished early anyway. But there are some really good questions here, so just a 3-minute break. 3 minutes.